in our bundle.
Good evening, everyone. I'm presenting on sepsis. Sepsis is a life-threatening.
Harsha, be loud. You're not audible very well. Just come close to the mic and speak.
Yes, sir. Sepsis is a life-threatening organ dysfunction caused by the dysregulated host response to infections. Sepsis and septic shock are major health problems affecting millions of people around the world, each year killing as many as 1 in 4 people. It is considered as the most expensive condition treated in the year 2011 to 2018. The definition of the sepsis.
So shall we talk after every slide, or how should we go about?
No, I think what we'll do is let her finish a section. Then after that, we'll intervene. She can finish a section and then we can intervene.
So we may have to go back on the slides also for comments. Yeah. Okay.
So there are all
Please go ahead, Harsha.
These are the old definitions of the sepsis. Sepsis is the systemic manifestation of infection, and severe sepsis is considered as the sepsis with organ dysfunction, hypoperfusion, or hypotension. And septic shock was sepsis with arterial hypotension despite fluid resuscitation with organ dysfunction. These were the old definitions. The new definition, according to the third international consensus definition for sepsis and septic shock, which was updated in 2016, was a life-threatening organ dysfunction caused by dysregulated host response to infection. The mortality of sepsis is more than 10%, and the new diagnostic tool for sepsis is QSOFA. QSOFA is done in casualty. QSOFA includes hypotension, that is systolic blood pressure less than 100 mm Hg, altered mental status, or tachypnea with a respiratory rate more than 22 per minute. If the score is more than or equal to 2, then this criteria suggests a greater risk of poor outcome. There is another score, which is SOFA score, which is done in ICU, which includes respiratory rate, PaO2 by FiO2, number of platelets, bilirubin, mean arterial pressure, GC score, and creatinine. It indicates the mortality in sepsis. If the SOFA score is 0 to 6, the mortality is less than 10%, and if the SOFA score is 15 to 24, it indicates a mortality of more than 90%. According to the new definition, yes, sir?
Let her finish this, I think, then we'll intervene. Let her finish the definitions.
So, according to the new definition, septic shock is considered as a subset of sepsis in which underlying circulatory and cellular or metabolic abnormalities are profound enough to substantially increase the mortality, with a persisting hypotension requiring vasopressors to maintain a mean arterial pressure of more than or equal to 65 mm Hg, with a blood lactate of more than 2 millimole per deciliter, despite adequate volume resuscitation. The mortality of septic shock is more than 40%. And systemic inflammatory response syndrome is temperature more than 38 degrees Celsius or less than 36 degrees Celsius, heart rate more than 90 beats per minute, and respiratory rate more than 20 per minute, with a WBC more than 12,000 or less than 4,000 or more than 10% in immature band form. If 2 or more of the above criteria is fulfilled, then it indicates a systemic inflammatory response syndrome. So comparing to the old definition and the new definitions, according to the old definition, sepsis is suspected infection along with SIRS, and new definition is suspected infection with a QSOFA score more than or equal to 2 or rising SOFA score by more than or equal to 2. Severe sepsis, according to the old definition, is sepsis plus hypotension with hypoxia with an elevated lactate or other lab markers indicating an end organ dysfunction. But this category is removed in new definition. Septic shock in old definition is sepsis with hypotension after adequate fluid resuscitation, and in new definition it is sepsis plus vasopressor with lactate more than 2.
So one minute. Now we'll stop here, Harsha. Two
Yes,
things.
sir.
One is speak a little slowly. Speak a little slowly so that it is clear to everyone. Now we'll, I think, give it to Prachi. 2 or 3 things I think you should bring up as to what is the reason for this change in the diagnosis, one thing. Second is this change in diagnosis accepted by everyone, and are you still using the older one also? And third is there is a lot of controversy about using these definitions and the diagnosis of an infection causing so non-septic manifestations of the same picture. So I think you can comment on all of these.
Right. So I think we should go. Can you go back to first slide? First slide.
Yes.
Harsha.
This one, no?
Yeah, right. So this is your first slide. So here the sepsis, basically it is a life-threatening organ dysfunction, they have said. So SOFA score actually is not telling you all the life-threatening situation right away, but it tells you the beginning of the process which can lead to life-threatening dysfunction. And why it is said as dysregulated host response. Latest guidelines, latest surviving sepsis guidelines said dysregulated host response was involved for the first time. Till that time, it was only the effects of sepsis. So infection is not killing, but the immune response which is dysregulated is actually causing organ failures and life-threatening issues which are happening. Okay. Then here you have said mortality more than 10%. But actually mortality of sepsis is very, very high. You have shown it in the next slide with QSOFA and SOFA scores that in fact it goes up to 40 to 50% in sepsis shock. Okay. Right. Now, go back. Okay, we'll stay here. So SOFA score, what does SOFA stand for? What does SOFA stand for?
Sequential organ failure assessment.
Sequential organ failure assessment. So it is a progressive situation, and sepsis, when it is becoming, see, there may be one source in the body, but when it becomes sepsis is when the whole body gets affected, and so various organs start getting involved. And so it is a sequential situation, and that is why they have shown that all the systems have got gradually worsening parameters, and that is what is ultimately telling you how severity of the sepsis is. So these SOFA score includes lot of lab parameters. So when you receive a patient in the casualty, you obviously do not have lab parameters. You always only have clinical history and clinical examination. So go back to the slide of your QSOFA. Right. And that is why for quick triaging, see, when a patient comes to casualty, what you have to do is triage. You have to decide whether this patient needs to get admitted, whether this patient needs to get admitted in the ward, or whether this patient needs to go to ICU. These are three very important issues, because once the septic process has started, it can be severely downgoing. So if you admit a patient in the ward and you see him tomorrow, within 24 hours, he can go into irreversible window. That's why for triaging, QSOFA is very important, which is taking into account only three parameters. So any elderly lady, for example, who has history of fever for 1 day and has come to you in altered mental status with mild rise in tachypnea, still can fit in QSOFA, where you will have to consider as sepsis with threatened organ failure as one of the parameters, or one of the severity. Okay, next please. Right. So coming to, I can see Dr. Tanima. Welcome, Tanima.
Hi.
Right. So coming to definitions, there has been a change. You please come to your slide of previous and old and new definitions. Right. So SIRS, you had mentioned about SIRS, which is called as systemic inflammatory response syndrome. That has been removed completely. Because it has taken into account QSOFA, which is a more bedside accessible tool to decide the severity of sepsis. Then it is always said everywhere suspected infection, because it is not necessarily that the infection has to be a trigger. For example, we know conditions like acute pancreatitis. It is not related to infection, but it is only related to severe inflammation in the body. And there can be multiple conditions like that, which can be positive factor. For example, burn. It's not an infection, but there can be severe inflammation. And severe inflammation with QSOFA score itself is enough to diagnose sepsis. With septic shock, sepsis with hypotension, So hypotension is the first parameter to tell you that the shock or circulatory compromise has started taking place. But lactate has now been included in definition because lactate indicates anaerobic metabolism that is taking place in the body because of hypoperfusion of various tissues and various organs. Dr. Tanima, you want to add?
How should residents calculate the MAP?
Calculate what?
How should residents calculate the MAP?
MAP. Anybody can tell me the definition of MAP?
And mean arterial pressure, it denotes the pressure inside the arteries during cardiac cycle. It can be calculated by 2 into diastolic blood pressure plus systolic blood pressure divided by 3.
Correct. So this
But
is
there's
the
an app
simplest
available.
calculation. No, but MAP can be easily calculated bedside and we should do that. You should never rely on systolic blood pressure alone. What is important is diastolic blood pressure. And the manifestation of sepsis, one of the first and most important thing is wide pulse pressure. So systolic blood pressure, like say 120, if you just palpate by palpatory method, sister tells you BP 120 hai. You should not rely on that. You always should ask the diastolic blood pressure. So 120 by 60 or 120 by 40, you can get such severe pulse pressures in these patients. And then diastolic blood pressure is very important for perfusion of various organs. Heart, we are all aware, but even all other organs. And that is why 1 systolic plus 2 diastolic divided by 3 is mean arterial pressure. And these days, most of the bedside monitors will show us MAP.
Tanima and Piyush, can you add anything more further to what Prachi just said?
The mean arterial pressure actually gives us an idea about the organ perfusion that is happening, and that is why that is more important than just systolic values. And like Dr. Prachi rightly said, that there is a lot of vasodilatation that is happening, as a result of which the diastolics may be really low. And so just going by macro parameters like looking at just the systolic is not good enough. And of course, in sepsis, you have to also look at other parameters of perfusion, like mentation, urine output, extremities, how cold or warm they are. So just isolated blood pressure values really are not a good enough indication for what's happening at the tissue level.
Piyush, you
So
want to
one question for Prachi is, like,
Yeah.
as a gastroenterologist, we have been switching to the new criteria, but they are not all people who accept the new criteria, and they see problems with the new criteria. So in just a few minutes, if you can tell what are the problems with the new criteria, Dr. Prachi.
No, I think these are good enough criteria because here you have to have very high index of suspicion by using these criteria like quick SOFA. Lactate has been very, very useful as one of the indicators. So not only clinical criteria would include Q SOFA or clinically whatever you can calculate out of SOFA score plus lactate.
One advantage which I find is our blood gas, they give the lactate. So it becomes very quick. You can do a quick SOFA, quick lactate, and you
Yes.
know that you have to act immediately.
Yeah, so lactate levels above 2 is a very, very sensitive indicator. And in response to your therapy, if the lactate is coming down, also is a very good indicator that you are on the right path. Now,
Of adequacy of fluid resuscitation, basically.
fluid resuscitation, that's right.
I think she is coming to that later.
Yeah, can I ask a basic question to the presenter?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Tanesh.
So I just want to ask, what are the 4 tubes which are important to monitor your critically ill patient in ICU?
what are your 4
Yes, sir.
tubes that are
Four?
important? 4
My
tubes.
question to the presenter, is because this is resident which is presenting,
Harsha.
what are the 4 tubes important?
Sir, Foley's catheterization is important to monitor the urine output, and to monitor the central venous pressure, one CVP line is required, and IV line is required to provide the enough fluid and then to supply the antibiotics to the patient, and to
When you have a
prevent the
central, why do you need a peripheral line?
peripheral line to sir, if you have to give simultaneously the fluid resuscitation and the antibiotics, you have
I think I would like to comment over here. Dr. Dhanesh, I think you have brought up a very, very basic parameter, very, very basic issue over here. I don't know 4 tubes or 5 tubes, but minimally invasive is one of the most important things these days in all the branches of medicine. Accordingly, if you touch the patient, if patient is peripherally cold, or the difference between the core temperature and peripheral temperature is high, that itself indicates clinically that there is hypoperfusion. That hypoperfusion can happen because of peripheral vasoconstriction, but septic shock is totally different because it's a vasodilatory shock and it is called as warm shock in initial phases. So that may not be able to tell you. So then what else can tell you? So you mentioned about Foley's catheter. So Foley's catheter, after you have started monitoring basic parameters like pulse rate, respiratory rate, and mean arterial pressure, Foley's catheter can tell you about hourly urine output, which is one of the very, very important parameters to monitor in a patient of septic or any type of circulatory shock. It has been called as poor man's cardiac output monitor. So hourly urine output is very important. And if all that is not adequate during fluid resuscitation, then you have to go ahead as a next step for arterial line monitoring. Central line monitoring these days has been replaced by various non-invasive parameters like monitoring IVC. So the fullness of IVC and the response in response to fluid, what is happening? Central venous parameter. You will come to that, so we will talk about it further.
Yeah, but the see, so I would say the 4 tubes would be, one is the central line, number 2 arterial line, number 3 Foley's, and number 4 endotracheal tube, which would basically give you all the respiratory management. So all critically ill patients, these 4 tubes, from the resident's point of view, has to be monitored properly.
But one message for residents actually is to learn to take the pulse clinically.
Yes.
Because feel of the pulse is something which cannot be replaced, because many times when I go to the ICU, I feel the pulse and then I ask the resident, he says, nahi sir, wo systolic BP itna hai, BP monitor pe itna hai. So I think you have to learn to check the pulse, and once you do it repeatedly, you will start getting the differences in the feel of the pulse. And like Dr. Prachi said, you can very quickly identify that this patient is likely to be septic. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I
The pulse may be bounding. Actually, pulse may be bounding in septicemic shock. Bounding.
Okay,
I don't think the takeaway message can be every patient needs to be ventilated and you need to have an arch line and a central line in all patients. Urine output, of course, Foley's is necessary, but I think a good alkaline initially for fluid resuscitation may take away the need for immediate central venous catheterization.
we are coming to that. We are coming to that.
Yeah. Okay.
You can proceed.
So this is the pathogenesis of septic shock. Once the pathogen causing the sepsis will come to the body, it will release a pathogen-associated molecular particle. This will be identified by the receptors in the innate immune cells. It will release inflammatory mediators.
I feel loud, Harsha. Your voice is not very clear.
Loud and little slow in speed.
No.
Harsha, can you use a headset, because it becomes easily audible if you're using a headset?
I'm using the headset only, sir.
Keep the
I'll
mic
change
in
it, sir.
your mouth.
I'll change it, sir.
The mic in your mouth.
अक्षता के हेडफोन्स ले ले वाइट वाले.
Okay.
Anima, can you also use a headset, because your voice gets muffled?
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. Right. You want to explain this slide?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So, ma'am, first of all, the pathogen which is entering to the body will produce a pathogen-associated molecular pattern. It will be identified by the cells, identified by the receptors in the innate immune cells. They will release some cytokines like interleukin-1, interleukin-6, or tumor necrosis factor. It will activate the inflammation, and they will produce damage-associated molecular particles. It will cause the damage to the endothelial cells. Because of the damage in endothelial cells, there will be a leak of intravascular particles, and it will stimulate the a complementary cascade and coagulation pathway. Because of the stimulation of coagulation pathway, there will be platelet aggregation and thrombus can be formed in microcirculation. And because of the complementary pathway, and also it may release nitric oxide, there will be hypotension, hypovolemia, and vasodilation. Because of the thrombus and because of hypovolemia, hypertension, and vasodilation, there will be decreased oxygen supply to the organs. Due to that, the electron transport chain will be affected, which results in decreased ATP, which results in increase of anaerobic glycolysis and increased lactate. Finally, results in end organ damage. This is the pathogenesis of sepsis.
Okay, so you have mentioned over here PAMPs and DAMPs. So pathogen associated molecular patterns and damage associated, right?
Yes.
So basically, whenever there is some outside threat to the body, what is body going to do? It is going to identify it as an external invader, and body is going to respond to that for two reasons. One is to kill or remove those pathogens or invaders, and secondly, at the same time, to protect rest of your body. But when these two are matching, then the patient improves, and when it is not matching or there is a dysregulation, then the patient goes into what is called as sepsis. So all these mechanisms which you have described are very correct. It starts with the endothelial involvement, so it is also called as pan-endothelial involvement of sepsis. And that is the reason why distant organs also can get affected. You may have infection somewhere on the foot, but if it becomes septic, even kidney can get affected as AKI, even lung can get affected and gradually go into ARDS, or there is severe hypotension because of lack of vasomotor tone all over. So all this is a very, very complex. It is called as immunobiology of sepsis. Yes, Tanima, you want to add?
No, I think that's adequate.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the important things is that it is trying to give more and more blood circulation to the peripheries, but in fact, delivery of oxygen gets reduced and ability of the tissues to take up oxygen also goes down, and that adds to organ damage as well. Next, please.
There are some conditions which mimics as sepsis. It include diabetic ketoacidosis, pulmonary embolism, pancreatitis, anaphylaxis, toxic ingestion overdose or withdrawal, vasculitis, bowel obstruction, hypovolemia, or adrenal insufficiency. It will also mimic as sepsis only, these conditions.
So in this, I would say pancreatitis actually causes sepsis. We won't say that it is a mimic. Then in bowel obstruction like situations where there is no infection as such, but there can be translocation of bacterial toxins and which clinically can manifest as sepsis. Yeah.
But pancreatitis causing sepsis, meaning in the initial phase, you can't call it a sepsis.
Yeah, only when you start getting, yeah. No, but now
it has a potential to become septic eventually.
It has a potential.
Yeah. Initially, it will be non-infective.
And SIRS has been removed now from the definition.
True.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm going to discuss the sepsis treatment guideline according
to
the
just one moment. We'll ask Prachi to intervene here. Now that you have made a quick so far, you suspect that the patient has sepsis.
Yeah.
Now, just tell us the principle behind developing these guidelines and the sepsis bundles, so that then the stage is set for our presentation.
Right. So sepsis has been a great killer through the ages, through the decades actually, but there could not be any trials or comparisons. See, today I say in our ICU the survival of sepsis is like 60%. Another ICU says we have got survival say 90%. So basically, unless and until you have a comparable background or comparable platform based on which you can compare patients, you cannot say anything like that. Also, we have to understand that there has to be a commonality to try any new drugs or any new bundles or any new interventions. And that is why we all of us have to be on the same platform. And that is what the Surviving Sepsis campaign has tried to do. Identify the subsets, because all sepsis is not the same. There is a very wide spectrum of sepsis, start of different stages of sepsis also. So the treatment.
Prachi, we have lost your audio. Tanima, you want to
We didn't hear the last part.
audio is lost.
That-
Tanima, you want to take over meanwhile?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
like that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. No, carry on, madam. You were.
Importance of sepsis bundles, why they were devised.
Right. So this particular syndrome, it is called as syndrome. It is not one disease. It is a response to various insults that are happening in the body, and it is a syndrome with a very wide spectrum. So bundle is a set of interventions which is to be carried out, all of them together in a depicted time window. And when you apply all of the principles, then only there can be a measurable output. And that is the bundle concept. And initially they came up with 6-hour bundle and 24-hour bundle. But gradually it was realized that, like for example, in thrombolysis, there is a time window. Similarly, in sepsis, there is a time window. And you have to pick up the patient early and make interventions early. And in bundle, then there are certain interventions are put together or clubbed together, which you have to apply together. Then only you can have better outcome in that particular stage of sepsis.
Sure. So I think you can go ahead, Harsha.
So the sepsis treatment guideline, according to the surviving sepsis campaign bundle in 2018 update. Whenever a patient comes to the casualty, so our one bundle, that is initial resuscitation for sepsis and septic shock, includes measuring the lactate, obtaining the blood culture before administering the antibiotic, and administer broad spectrum antibiotic as soon as possible, and rapid administration of crystalloids for hypotension should be started at a rate of 30 ml per kg for hypotension, or if the lactate is more than or equal to 4 millimole per liter, and a vasopressor should be started if the patient is hypotensive even after the fluid resuscitation to maintain a mean arterial pressure of more than or equal to 65 millimeter Hg. Lactate have to be remeasured if the initial lactate is more than or equal to 2 millimole per liter. This is the first hour bundle. The sepsis and the septic shock are medical emergencies, so quick action should be started, and the response to the intervention should be monitored closely. First of all, whenever patient comes, the screening should, whenever a patient with a serious illness comes, screening should be done with the Q-SOFA score, and then diagnosis should be made. The diagnosis of the particular pathogen should be made by sending the blood culture before administering the antibiotics. For that, blood culture should be sent from 2 or more than 2 sites, and it should be sent for both aerobic and anaerobic culture. It can be sent from periphery, from each separated IV catheter, or from multiple lumen of the same IV catheter if IV catheter induces sepsis is suspected. Not only blood, other samples like a CSF, wound secretions, respiratory secretions can also be sent. Then antimicrobial therapy. Coming to antimicrobial therapy should be started as soon as possible and should be administered within the first hour of recognition of septic shock. Empirical broad spectrum antimicrobial therapy should be started, including antibiotics, antifungals, and antivirals, and de-escalate once the particular pathogen is identified or if the patient is showing adequate clinical improvement. The duration of antibiotic is 7 to 10 days, and it can be modified according to the organism and to the patient factors. Procalcitonin can be used as a biomarker to diagnose the acute infection and to monitor the patient's response to antibiotic and to differentiate infective and non-infective causes of sepsis. Other biomarkers which are considered other than the procalcitonin are galactomannan, beta-D-glucan, C-reactive protein, pro-inflammatory cytokines like a tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 1, 6, 8, or brain natriuretic peptide, which are not regularly done.
Carry on. We'll finish this and then we'll discuss.
Source control should be done immediately, that is within 6 to 12 hours if possible.
Switch off your microphones, please.
So source control should be done immediately.
Can you please put off your microphone, whoever is speaking?
coming to source control should be done immediately, that is within 6 to 12 hours if possible. That is the debridement of the wound or drainage of the abscess, or we have to remove the infective foci. IV devices should be removed if you are suspecting a sepsis from the IV. Fluid therapy should be started as early as possible. The fluid of choice is crystalloid. Among crystalloid, isotonic saline or balanced salt can be considered, and it should be started at a rate of 30 ml per hour. Albumin can also be used if the patient is requiring substantial amount of fluid. But nowadays, hydroxyethyl statins are not used. It can result in increased mortality due to renal failure. The vasoactive medication. If the patient is not acquiring a target mean arterial pressure of 65 mm of Hg, vasopressors have to be used. The first choice of vasopressor to be used is norepinephrine. All patients requiring the vasopressor should have an arterial catheter placed for blood pressure monitoring if resources are available. The fluid resuscitation goal is mean arterial pressure of
we can stop here. I think we'll go to this. Now we'll again, I'll direct some questions to Prachi, and then of course she can take over.
Yes,
the first issue is about, if you look at these people who come with sepsis and septic shock, to me, I think there are 4 important causes. One is pulmonary, second is urinary tract infection, third is a GI infection, and soft tissue. So how do you decide what are the guidelines? Because she said broad spectrum antibiotics, but for each of these 4, if you agree with me that these are the 4 common causes, what is your choice of antibiotics for each of these 4?
Okay, I think to talk about antimicrobial therapy, we will have to have another session. We will have to concentrate on sepsis management because it is really going to take time.
But what are your choices in general? Pulmonary, GI, soft tissue, and UTI.
Okay, so if it is respiratory, you have to consider whether it is coming from community or hospital acquired. So if it is coming from community, there are classical guidelines given for management of community acquired pneumonia. So we have to go accordingly, like third generation cephalosporin and atypical cover you can give. If it is a GI, again upper GI or lower GI would make a difference, or whether there is gastroenteritis like condition or typhoid like situation. But again, third generation cephalosporin is a good choice to start. Skin and soft tissue, you can give extended spectrum penicillin, which be like even clavulanic acid with means augmentin like combination, or you can use clindamycin, because there you also need to cover anaerobic. And which is the 4th one you said? UTI. Sometimes urosepsis. Yeah, sometimes urosepsis can be significant. And in urosepsis, if it is community acquired, we can still use a quinolone group, or we can use cephalosporin group also in this.
And then I think you should tell us about the balanced electrolytes versus normal saline.
That we will come to. Shall we go to the first slide?
Go ahead. Okay, sure.
Yeah. So first slide where you started. This A. Yeah. So 1 hour bundle. 1 hour bundle. See, first hour is extremely important. Why it is important? That many studies have shown that the interventions, and first hour means what? See, in myocardial infarction, it is easy to monitor the onset because there can be chest pain. Whereas in sepsis, it's extremely difficult to find out what is the onset of sepsis. So a first hour is considered as from the point of triage, when the patient actually reaches either casualty or has been picked up in the ward with news that the patient is deteriorating or there is some alteration in QSOFA. So that is considered as first hour. And in first hour bundle, lot of studies have been taken into account, which are showing better outcome if you are acting on all these parameters within 1 hour. For example, broad spectrum antibiotic. There is a very landmark paper by Dr. Kumar from Canada, which he showed that the time from onset of hypotension to giving first dose of broad spectrum antibiotic correlated very well with outcome of sepsis. Okay. Yeah, go back to the first slide again. So measuring lactate, we already talked about the importance of lactate, but this should come back in a blood gas itself, because there is no point in sending lactate today and getting lactate after 8 hours or tomorrow. So it's extremely important. Then blood cultures before administering antibiotics has to be made as a rule, because blood cultures may come after 2 days, doesn't matter. But you must know what was the offending organism, because you are giving empiric antibiotic today. If it doesn't work, and then if you send blood culture, then it is going to show you wrong results. It is not going to give you proper guidance. Then coming to fluids, right? So you can go back to your slide on fluids. Right. Fluid therapy is the mainstay of treatment of any type of septic shock in any stage most of the times. I think this is one of the favorite topics of Dr. Tanima. So let's
I was about to say that we'll ask Tanima to talk about this.
But I'll just mention one thing here before she takes over, that crystalloids are the mainstay. Isotonic saline has been replaced by balanced salt solutions, because when you require large amounts of fluids, it has been shown beyond doubt that hyperchloremic acidosis can take place because of administration of isotonic saline. Even though it is called an isotonic, it is a hypertonic solution, because if you actually consider the contents of sodium and chloride, they are way higher than what we have in plasma. So balanced salt solutions are the solutions, crystalloids, which actually match the plasma content, and that is why do not cause any alteration. When hyperchloremic acidosis takes place, it can show that acute kidney injury incidence is higher and incidence of CRRT is higher.
So we'll give over to Tanima now.
Yeah.
Tanima, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. Actually, Dr. Prachi has already highlighted the important things, and that the fluid resuscitation becomes the mainstay of treatment in a patient with septic shock. We need to remember that these patients are vasodilated and there is relative deficiency of fluid, and which is resulting in tissue hypoperfusion. So the most important thing is first to fill them up, and the guidelines, the surviving sepsis guidelines clearly tell us that you need to give them up to the tune of 30 ml per kg of fluid in the first hour. Of course, you have to monitor other parameters while giving this kind of fluid. And the amount of fluid, of course, seems like it's quite large, but in these patients, it really shows a very beneficial effect. And
so
like Dr. Prachi said,
3 liters, 3 pints of fluid.
Yeah, so 30 ml per kg comes to about 1500 roughly in a patient. So it is in an hour, you're pushing it about. Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. So you're pushing up. Yeah, so you're pushing nearly about three pints of fluid in that initial hour. And like Dr. Prachi said, that the choice of agent would be crystalloids as opposed to colloids, because colloids, the BICEP trial had very clearly told us that it doesn't really give you any benefit. But of course, there is the increased incidence of renal failure, increased coagulopathies, increased need for the renal replacement therapy, and of course, increased need for subsequent blood transfusions as well. And overall, the length of stay was also shown to have increased. So colloids have really gone out of favor in the recent era. And coming to balanced solutions, there are 2 trials, the SALTED and the SMART trials, if you can go through them. They have significantly spoken in favor of balanced crystalloids, where they've shown that there is they could show a mortality benefit from all cause, along with a decrease in the renal replacement therapy, as well as the persistence of renal dysfunction in both trials. The only contraindication to balanced crystalloids, I think, would be if there is significant metabolic alkalosis or if there is a primary neurologic diagnosis. Other than that, I think balanced solutions are here to stay. The SAFE study
in itself, or hyponatremia in itself.
Or hyponatremia, yes. And saline, of course, has always been considered to be this wonderful crystalloid which meets all our needs. But like Dr. Prachi said, hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis is a real possibility when large volume resuscitation is done, which results in a normal anion gap kind of metabolic acidosis. And of course, the other disadvantages were discussed. But however, after... Hello?
Yeah, carry on.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, of course, this is very simple because the surviving sepsis guideline has simplified it for us by telling us that 30 ml per kg has to be given. But it is only the subsequent
Oh, you have got muted. You have got muted, Tanima.
whether this patient is still fluid responsive, that plays a very important role, because once you're done with this amount of fluid, it is still possible for the patient to remain fluid responsive, and that's where the role of hemodynamic monitoring comes in. And like we had started the discussion of whether central line and CVP is important or not. So the problem with any pressure monitoring is it gives you a value which tells you about what is happening at that point of time, but it cannot really effectively predict whether this patient is going to be responsive. So it tells you, say it's 10 centimeters of water or 12 centimeters of water right now, but what it doesn't answer is whether this patient is going to accommodate more fluid or not. And so that is the dilemma with monitoring central venous pressure or any isolated static measures. So static measures have this disadvantage that they cannot predict whether more fluid can be accommodated. And that's why you need more dynamic kind of variables which can tell you whether this patient will accommodate more fluid. And like Dr. Prachi already introduced it, that IVC diameter plays a very important role. It can make a good dynamic assessment. So with the help of an ultrasound or an echo probe, you could actually see the IVC diameter. And the normal diameter would be anywhere less than 2 centimeters, so around 1 to 1.5 centimeters. The upper cutoff is about 2 centimeters. And of course, what you see is the collapsibility. During the respiratory cycle, you expect a collapsibility to be there. So if the collapsibility is more 50% on the MO, you can actually see it. And if the collapsibility is more than 50%, this patient is likely to accommodate fluid very readily. And you can go ahead giving aliquots and subsequently monitoring the IVC diameter again. This is patient is spontaneously breathing, but if the patient is mechanically ventilated, then you have to do the same thing, but now it is a distensibility index that is calculated, and here the variability is roughly about 18%. So in a mechanically ventilated patient, if you see the distensibility index being more than 18%, it tells you that this patient can accommodate more fluid. That is one aspect of dynamic monitoring. Other than that, you can use dynamic monitors, like you can use stroke volume variation or even your 2D echo. A 2D echo is very helpful if you place your probe at the LVOT, the outlet, the LV outlet, and you actually calculate the area and then give certain amount of fluid aliquot and then actually monitor the velocity time integral. This is getting kind of complicated, but you can actually use your 2D echo as a dynamic tool for assessing whether the patient is fluid responsive or not. But however, we find the bedside IVC monitoring very practical, and it really gives us a guide as to whether this patient will accommodate more fluid. However, if CVP has to be used, the best way to use CVP as a guide would be to see the trends of CVP. So you give fluid and you see what is happening to the CVP. If the CVP tends to rise and continues to rise with your fluid monitor, with your fluid resuscitation, it would probably tell you that, you know, the patient is not accommodating a large volume of fluid. But when you give, say, about a 250 ml bolus, and then you look at the CVP, say it's about 12 centimeters, and you wait for about 5 to 10 minutes and repeat the CVP, and if you find that the CVP is tending to drop again, that tells you that this patient is still fluid responsive. And of course, if giving fluids does not increase your CVP dramatically, it kind of gives you an idea that this patient is going to accommodate more and more fluid. So I think trending is very important when it comes to looking at static measures. And other than that, of course, lactates need to be monitored as or reassessed when you're doing fluid resuscitation. A drop in your lactate levels tells you that you are doing the right thing, and that hypoperfusion is settling over a period of time. So I think dynamic variables are here to stay, and dynamic monitoring really helps us understand what whether your patient is fluid responsive or not, which is a real dilemma at the bedside when a clinician is trying to resuscitate a septic shock patient.
Right.
Okay, before moving ahead, any comments from Dr. Ichapuria and Dr.
Parimal,
Piyush
1
or
minute. I
Dr.
have
Vadia,
one
sir?
question. Parimal,
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
question. This is to both of you. When you talk about saying somebody's got a refractory hypertension, that means, does it mean that failure to respond to fluid or you're needing a high amounts of inotropes? Is there a definite definition to say that somebody's got a refractory hypertension?
That's right. That's right. So response to fluid needs to be checked. So see here, I just want to summarize 1 or 2 points that central venous pressure is not the ideal way. For fluid resuscitation, it is not mandatory to have central line. Fluid resuscitation should be done through peripheral lines because rate of flow of fluids is much higher through peripheral cannula of 18 or 16 number rather than a small lumen of a central line. So indication for central line is mainly to give vasopressors when you decide about refractory hypotension. So you were asking Sanjay about refractory hypotension. So even after giving a fluid challenge of 30 ml per kg within first 1 or 2 hours, if still there is not adequate improvement in the patient's parameter in the form of tachycardia, in the form of lactate, in the form of hourly output which should be at least 50 ml per 0.5 ml per kg body
0.5.
weight. So if that is not happening, then you label it as refractory hypotension to go ahead with the next step.
So does it also amount to the amount of inotropes that you're giving the patient? Suppose your fluid resuscitated and the patient is not responded and the patient is on simultaneous inotropes. So does it amount also how much of inotropes that you're using for the patient?
No, inotrope is not included through in initial phase of initial bundles of sepsis management to call it a refractory hypotension. Refractory hypotension here in first hour or first 3 hour bundle basically is used that patient who is not responding to adequate fluid resuscitation. And again, adequacy changes from patient to patient, like Dr. Tanima mentioned. It is not that one stereotype 3 pints to be given. Patient still may be accommodating more. Patient who comes with severe gastroenteritis can accommodate 4, 5, 6 pints also before the patient is filled up adequately with fluid.
Does any resident have any question? Please ask the questions. You can type or you can ask questions. So unmute yourself and ask questions.
Can I chip in, guys?
Yes,
Go ahead.
You know, when we are dealing with a patient of septic shock or early sepsis, why are we resistant to put in invasive lines to monitor the patients?
No, we are not resistant at all.
No.
We are not at all resistant. Invasive lines
fact,
and arterial line is a good thing, very good way of
In fact,
monitoring.
dynamic variables, when we talk about stroke volume variation, etc., it requires invasive lines. It requires the arterial line.
Yeah. We are not
In
resistant.
my,
So basically,
in
the
my
problem.
opinion,
But people
in
should
my
know
opinion,
yeah.
in my opinion, you can manage and monitor the patient in a sepsis, early sepsis or even shock better with invasive lines than otherwise.
See what happens if if a treating doctor decides to put in central line and then make the decisions, you are losing a very important time in initial management because first hour is extremely important. So the first fluid management decisions have to be taken on the basis of bedside clinical assessment.
I think you always start with peripheral and then
then go to a central and then see peripheral line and Foley's catheter immediate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
now
oxygen is also a part of the initial phase.
Yeah.
And then you consider putting in central line and arterial line.
Any quick comments from Piyush and Nasli?
My training is different.
Nasli and Piyush, any comments, quick comments?
Yeah, so just mainly I'll restrict to antibiotic use. This 1 hour thing, of course, that paper by Dr. Kumar et al. In 2006 that did show increase in mortality by almost 7.56% for every hour. But then many trials subsequently have shown that the maximum benefit is actually with appropriate fluid management and vasopressor management when it comes to first 1 hour. So antibiotics, on an average, many patients receive up to first 3 hours. So it is important to choose antibiotics after having assessed the actual focus of infection and after giving a thought about the possible etiologies instead of just jumping onto antibiotic just because we have to stick to that 1 hour timeline.
Yeah.
Dr. Nasli, any comments?
Dr. Nasri has left. He had left a message on the chat.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So we'll go.
The only
ahead
thing I
and-
wanted to add was that I don't know whether this is going to come subsequently, but when we talk about shock which is not responding to just fluid therapy, and vasopressors have been added, and there is an ongoing increased need for vasopressors, there might be a role of steroids for there could be a possibility of
I think it is
relative
coming up. It
adrenal
will come up
insufficiency.
probably. It
So
will come
yeah,
up probably.
yeah, so fair enough.
It's coming, ma'am. I have
Yeah.
included it. So shall I continue?
Yes, please.
So the fluid resuscitation goal is mean arterial pressure of more than 65 millimeter Hg, cerebral venous pressure of 8 to 12 millimeter Hg with a urine output more than 0.5 ml per kg per hour.
So here,
The first
guideline is not at all an absolute value. It is in relation with the baseline and response to fluid. Okay, right.
and the vasopressor of choice is norepinephrine. It should be started with a rate of 0.5 and maximum dose is 30 microgram per kilogram per minute. The next choice is epinephrine, 0.5 to 10 microgram per minute. And if the patient is not responding to either of them, then vasopressin can be given at a rate of 0.04 unit per minute. Dopamine can be tried in patients if they are if the patients have a low risk of tachycardia or if they are having a relative bradycardia. It should be given at a dose of 2 to 20 microgram per kilogram per minute. Then phenylephrine is not mentioned in the guideline, but the patient is having a serious arrhythmia with norepinephrine or epinephrine, and with the patient is a non-high cardiac output, is having a high cardiac output state, and if the patient is still persistently having hypotension, then phenylephrine can be used. It is given at a dose of 10 to 200 microgram per minute.
Right. Okay.
Go
to
ahead.
complete-
You complete this, then we can discuss.
Right. Complete it.
Okay, sir. There were various trials regarding the vasopressor agents. One trial is VAST trial. VAST trial compared vasopressin and norepinephrine, and then observed the effect of that on 28-day mortality in septic stroke patients. It was a multi-center randomized double-blind trial considering taking 778 patients into account. It was noted that there was no difference in primary or secondary outcome, and there were no further adverse effects also. VANISH trial is another trial which were comparing vasopressin plus placebo or hydrocortisone versus norepinephrine plus placebo or hydrocortisone. It considered 409 patients, and in that also no difference was noted in the mortality. There was an ATHOS 3 trial. It was a trial evaluating the AT2, angiotensin 2, that is the name of the drug is Giapressa, for several vasodilators shock resistant to high dose vasopressors. It was a randomized double-blind multicenter trial considering 321 patients, and the improvement in mean arterial pressure was observed on 3-hour infusion, and the dose was given at a rate of 0.02 microgram per kilogram per minute. But the major side effect noted with the angiotensin 2 are thromboembolic events.
Right. So as far as inotropic or vasopressors are concerned, as you mentioned, norepinephrine is the mainstay of the treatment, and that has to be started only after adequate fluid resuscitation. It is not the first line therapy, but except in conditions where patient is absolutely in terminal stages, like patient is pulses are not felt at all and is in severe acidosis, you may have to start simultaneously. But otherwise, fluid resuscitation is the mainstay of it. While starting norepinephrine, of course, you have to have a central line. You should never give any vasopressors through peripheral line, because if at all there is any extravasation, then it actually leads to gangrenous changes in the limb. So you need to have that. And at that time, maybe monitoring of CVP on monitor is along with the other parameters should be done. Epinephrine is mentioned, but epinephrine is not used because epinephrine in lower doses can have vasodilatory effects in fact, but it can have good inotropic effect on the heart. So after norepinephrine, the second drug of choice is vasopressin. Various trials are there and various trials are ongoing also. But if fluids and norepinephrine is not enough, then you can consider adding vasopressin. Dopamine was one of the most important drugs before, but now it has almost gone out of fashion because of various bit of body of evidence which has shown. See, effects of dopamine are quite heterogeneous in various levels of dosages, and those also are not exactly the same for those same dosages in various patients, and the chances of tachycardia are much higher. So dopamine has gone out, and renal dose dopamine has been forgotten and out of textbooks also. Phenylephrine is not recommended in septicemic shock.
Dr.
So,
Tanima, any reservations on giving vasopressin in cardiac patients with ischemic heart disease?
Yeah, it is a pure peripheral vasoconstrictor. So yes, it would definitely increase the afterload tremendously. However, when it comes to near extremis, or if the patient is in absolute cardiogenic shock where your global parameters are also not being maintained, maybe you will start it, but you will be already considering an IABP by this time because this patient is in refractory cardiogenic shock. So if at all it is used, it will be used for a very short period of time as a bridge, but it's not recommended ideally, considering the pure vasoconstrictor status.
Okay, now as I can see, we are on slide 21 of 33, so we'll need to
I'm
rush.
going to stop 1 minute because there are a lot of questions, and if you can give very quick answers.
There was one question that I saw. Can I interrupt? Somebody did ask about the passive leg raise. Yeah. So the PLR, yes, actually it is a very useful technique, though it's very cumbersome. It is easier said than done when you actually first have to give a patient a head up and completely allow the, the blood volume to go down into the legs and then give them a leg raise. It is akin to about 300 ml of fluid being pushed into the system like a bolus, and so this can be used in conjunction with the CVP to it almost converts the CVP into a more dynamic monitor than a static monitor, and it can really tell you when this 300 ml of fluid is pumped into the system whether the parameters improve, and if the parameters improve, this tells you that the patient is probably fluid responsive. So PLR is a very useful technique, and especially because it converts the CVP from a static to a dynamic measure. And without actually giving a fluid bolus, you get the advantage of having given a fluid bolus. So it is a very useful technique, though very cumbersome really to keep doing it all the time. So I think that's the only reservation.
Just look at the chat window and address the questions.
Yeah. So dobutamine, somebody has asked the question about dobutamine. So noradrenaline, as we said, is the first line of therapy when there is severe peripheral vasodilatation. Dobutamine is important if there has been a disproportionate vasoconstriction peripherally. It is not necessarily in cardiomyopathy we are talking about, but we are talking about more uniform peripheral vasoconstriction dilatation state. So if there is cold periphery and noradrenaline requirement is high and cardiac output is not adequate, in that situation dobutamine can help because it is called as ionodilator. Action of dobutamine is ionodilator. It improves the contractility of the left ventricle and at the same time it reduces the afterload. So along with noradrenaline, it can help to improve the peripheral perfusion, and it has been included in the guidelines also as one of the choices.
Could Dr. Mrs. Duty join this, or she's not been able to join?
She's there. I can see her.
Yeah, she's here. Yeah.
Madam, any comments from you? You have been our teacher, everyone's teacher, like Dr. Wadia has been.
Yes.
There is a question about antibiotic and casualty itself, or after finding out focus of infection.
Yes. So antibiotic in casualty is important because first hour, and I think Dr. Piyush also made a comment on that. If not first hour, earliest possible antibiotic is important. So in casualty, you can give it. And in fact, we should have guidelines about using what antibiotics can be given. And the ICU team, along with Dr. Tanima, we are trying to establish sepsis code in which we are going to give these guidelines about the probable syndrome which is causing the sepsis or originating sepsis from, and the antibiotic which can be used.
I think actually, can I answer this a little bit?
Yes, yes.
Actually, I think a good history taking gives us an idea about the potential source. So you can establish sepsis, septic shock, as well as from the history, you can probably get a rough idea about what the likely source is, giving you an idea whether, what is our dilemma is whether we need to give a broad spectrum gram negative alone, or should we add an atypical cover, should we add a gram positive cover. These are our concerns. So good history taking might really help us in that. And after having sent the relevant cultures, I think a broad spectrum antibiotic can be decided by this. Requires good coordination between the ICU team and the ER, but between the two teams, I think it is possible to take a decision about which antibiotic would be appropriate considering the source, and can be done in the ICU itself. I mean, in the ER itself, I think, wherein we could meet the 1 hour requirement as well.
Yeah.
We'll address the nutrition question later on when we come to nutrition part. So we'll move on, Harsha. Let's move.
See, but there is still quite a lot to be discussed, and it's more. It is past 8:30 already. So can we have it one more session?
I think so. We have to talk about nutrition. We're going to talk about steroids, and what else is there?
Yeah.
Prachi and Tanima.
Thromboprophylaxis, stress ulcer prophylaxis. There's a quite a few things.
Can I chip in? We have
Tanima and
talk
Prachi.
about
What? Just one moment, Dhanesh.
We have to talk about thromboprophylaxis.
Yes,
thromboprophylaxis.
thromboprophylaxis.
So many things to be discussed.
Yeah.
We have to talk about expected vascular complications.
This
Quite
is
a few.
included in the coming slide, sir.
I think let's keep it for tomorrow. A second.
Yeah, I think let there be another session.
Now, what I would suggest to Tanima and Prachi is you just see the headings of the slides which she has now, which we have not discussed. And then you give her a guideline as to what all you want her to be covered, so that we'll have a good session tomorrow.
Let us send the present.
You don't read the slides, but show the titles to Tanima and Prachi and Piyush, and then we can see what can be added there.
Yes, I think
So
that's a good
tomorrow
idea.
we can do that. Is that a good idea?
Yes, it's a very good idea.
Harsha, just mail the
Yes, sir.
presentation to all of them, to Piyush, to Tanima, as well as to Prachi.
Okay, okay, sir.
If there is any addition, then they can mail it back to
Then
any
yeah. Abhi titles run karo na jaldi. Just
Just
run the
rapidly
titles.
through that.
Okay,
sheet.
sir.
Can I also chip in?
Yes, sir. Corticosteroids, blood products,
Yes,
mechanical ventilation,
yes,
glucose control, renal replacement therapy, venous thromboembolism prophylaxis,
yes.
nutrition, and that's it. These are the things which are not recommended. Anticoagulants, immunoglobulins, and blood purification methods.
Yeah.
Any additions you want?
No, I think this is fine. We can elaborate on each point.
Each one, yes.
Sure.
No, I think we also need to add, how are you going to treat the arterial ischemia in a peripheral parts?
Yes, yes.
In a septic shock.
Often give call to Dr. Kamerkar.
See, before ending, I have one practical question for both Dr. Tanima and Prachi. See, when you go to a ward and you see that you have written IVNS over 4 hours, you find that the drip is going at some 20 ml, 25 ml, and ideally you have to give it at about 50 ml to finish that drip in 4 hours. And when you are going to give this huge amount of fluid in a very short period, of course, like you rightly said, you can't give it to a small central, and you have to have ideally 2 peripheral cannulas.
Yes.
And like we sometimes in GI bleeders take that blood pack and literally squeeze it. So how do you practically give it? What is your formula?
See, it is very important, and I would be very happy that you have taken up this topic. Students and the residents actually neglect writing of fluid orders, either in wards or in post-operative period or in ICU for that matter. So any fluid has to be ordered properly, that which route it is to be used and at what rate it is to be given. And the nurses also have to record at what point of time it has been started and at what point of time it is ended and how it is being given every hour. And these days when we are finding out the papers for some retrospective studies, we find that the nurses are doing a better job than the residents. And the residents have to write proper order. In post-operative patients also we see one normal saline, one isolate, one ringer lactate, and one whatever. So this is not the way of writing fluids. Fluids are drugs, and the orders have to be written meticulously like drugs. So rate of administration also has to be written. The number of, the name of the fluid and at what rate, 100 ml per hour or 150 ml per hour should be the order when we are writing, and it should be checked. So when we are giving fluid challenge, you can't tell the sister you run the fluid. But what is fluid challenge, for example, is a test, bedside test. You have to see that what happened after fluid challenge. So you give a fluid challenge like 250 cc or 300 ml and come back within half an hour and see what are the changes in patient's parameters that have taken place. So fluids have to be treated with respect, and the orders are to be given meticulously like any other drug of importance.
So reason I raised this point, was because many times we fail on this initial step itself. And
Yes.
then we start noradrenaline saying that he is not responding. So
Yes,
I think for all residents, it is extremely important that you be at the bedside. Every half hour you check what has happened and then go ahead with all the vasopressors and all those things.
Okay, and writing order on paper does not finish resident's job. They have to come back and see whether it has been started, whether it is being given at the rate, and what is the difference in patient's condition. Because patient's condition is a dynamic situation. It is not a static situation. So I really thank Parimal for bringing up this very important topic.
Just one.
Can I chip in?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Danish.
Prachi is absolutely right. I tell my residents that even if they go to the wards, it is hourly IV and hourly output, and one has to basically correct it as per intake and output kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you can't just basically say 60 ml per hour right now and go on for overnight. No, one has to monitor after a couple of hours or 3 hours and see what's going on. Especially in a vascular patient, it's very critical when they go back to the ward, because for us, maintenance of stent patency or bypass patency is very critical. So fluid management is so critical for us. And I always tell my residents that, it cannot be just blanket 60 ml per hour. No, it cannot be like that.
Right. And there
In
are
practice,
number two, that was my first comment. Number two, Prachi, the painting behind you looks beautiful. I don't know if it's Van Gogh or Monet like kind of thing, but I like it.
This is Satawalekar. That is very important Indian artist.
Okay, Prachi,
Right,
quick question. Two things.
Can I just add one thing? Dr. Lavate had said that how do you give that large amount of fluid? So the only thing I'd say is that the first hour in sepsis management, I think easily is the most dynamic hour.
Absolutely.
And it requires someone to stand by the bedside and actually monitor whether that 30 ml per kg is going on not, which means 3 pints in that hour must be given, and somebody has to stand by the bedside and monitor it effectively.
Just 2 points I wanted to.
Can I chip in? Can I chip in?
Danish, 1 minute.
Sure.
1 minute, Danish.
Yeah.
Just 2 questions. One is, when you're doing rapid fluid corrections, you have to also pre-assess the ejection fraction, because if the patient has got a very poor ejection fraction and you're doing a very rapid fluid corrections, sometimes you can cause problems with the heart. That's one. And two, when you have a very septic lung and you're giving a lot of fluid, then the patient becomes breathless. Then are you flooding the lungs because of leakage is something that I want to ask both of you. That what would you do under situation?
Actually, the answer to that is it is considered to be the end point of resuscitation. If your lungs start getting early crackles, that becomes your end point of resuscitation. So whenever you're giving large volumes of fluid, it's a good idea to keep auscultating the chest every now and then. And of course, if you have a documented low EF, then probably it has to be a little more guarded, and maybe actually looking at real-time echo also really helps, because you can keep looking at the ventricle status and whether the ventricle is ballooning excessively or not. Maybe real-time echo also helps in that. So that's.
But I would say one more thing here. That suppose a patient has got low EF, but patient has sepsis. So
you still need fluids.
That doesn't preclude us from giving fluids. Maybe we can give smaller aliquots and recheck the patient frequently. And just hypostatic Krebs would not stop us from giving fluids, because just hypostatic Krebs is not an indicator that the patient is going into pulmonary edema. So we may need additional monitoring, as Dr. Danima said, bedside. So we have to keep on giving fluids. We should not deprive a patient who has got borderline ejection fraction from receiving fluids, because mainstay still is fluids in sepsis management. No doubt about it.
But
So,
one take-home message.
Can I chip in?
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
I chip in?
please.
You know, we have come a long way of monitoring this critically ill patient, whether it's surgical or medical. I remember sitting with the patient with all our major surgical procedures way back 35 years ago.
That is gone.
And, you know, monitoring those patients. And now we are so lucky that we have all these monitoring modules, you know, in today's day and age, where it gives you kind of picture. So we are kind of lucky, our residents kind of lucky to monitor these patients much better than what we would do then. And we don't have to really sit with the patient 24/7.
Ganesh, I little differ from you, because what has happened in all this technology, the human touch is gone, and the human assessment of the patient is gone. So, you know, the parameters can be faulty, but your own assessment can never be faulty.
Exactly. So there has to be a combination of both. And it is not the machine, but the man or woman behind the machine is important.
See,
Prachi and Sanjay, I always tell my residents, I don't like the look of the patient. He's sick. He's not well. You know, that comes by the experience.
Yeah.
No, but one take-home message, you know, which I always tell ICU doctors who are in training, is that you have to be ICU doctors and ICU physicians and not parameter correctors.
Yes,
so you shouldn't be saying
so it should not be
this
the
monitor shows. Absolutely. So you put your thought behind it and then look at the monitor and then correct it.
Yeah. So one more question which Sanjay had raised was about leaky capillaries and the lungs. So it has been shown in 2 or 3 important trials that negative fluid balance or proper fluid balance till the day 4 is an outcome. It can predict the outcome in ICU. So patient should not be in positive fluid balance by day 4, it says. But in initial phases, even though the capillaries are leaky, what is important is to maintain circulatory volume. So in initial phases, that should not deter us from giving fluids. You may need to ventilate the patient, but in initial phases, fluids is the mainstay of the treatment.